The worn leather wallet held only $3 bills and a faded photograph of two smiling children. Marcus stared at it under the flickering fluorescent lights of the convenience store, his calloused hands trembling. Behind him, a young mother fumbled through her purse with increasing panic, her toddler whimpering in the shopping cart. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the cashier, her voice cracking. "I thought I had enough." Marcus knew that desperation in her voice, he'd heard it in his own just months ago. He knew the shame of standing at a register, counting pennies while strangers watched. And in that moment, with barely enough for his own dinner, he made a choice that would change everything. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune as Marcus Hayes stepped forward, his work boots scraping against the linoleum floor. "I've got it," he said quietly, sliding his 3 crumpled bills across the counter before the young woman could protest. Her eyes, rimmed with exhaustion and unshed tears, met his for just a moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus was already walking away, his own basket abandoned, his stomach still empty. That night, Marcus returned to the construction site where he'd been sleeping since losing his apartment. The unfinished building offered shelter from the October wind, though little warmth. As he lay on a piece of cardboard, using his jacket as a blanket, he didn't regret his decision. He'd been where that woman was standing, maybe even lower. 6 months ago, Marcus had lost everything: his job as an electrician when the company downsized, then his apartment when the savings ran dry, and finally his dignity when he found himself standing in line at a food bank. What Marcus didn't know was that the young mother, Sarah Chen, had watched him leave the store and followed him at a distance, worried about the man who'd given away what appeared to be his last few dollars. When she saw him disappear into the construction site, her heart broke. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her own struggles, the medical bills from her daughter's hospital stay, the shifts she was juggling at 2 different restaurants, the constant fear of not having enough. Yet this stranger had given her his last dollars without hesitation. The next morning, Sarah did something unexpected. She wrote about Marcus on a community Facebook group, not knowing his name but describing his act of kindness and where she'd seen him go. "Someone helped me when I had nothing to offer in return," she wrote. "Now I want to help him. He's sleeping at the construction site on 5th and Main. He gave me his last $3. Who wants to join me in returning the kindness?" The post spread like wildfire through the small Ohio town of Riverside. By noon, it had been shared 300 times. By evening, something remarkable began to happen. Jenny Morrison, who owned the local diner, printed out the post and taped it to her window. Tom Bradley, who ran the hardware store, started collecting donations in a jar by his register. The high school student council organized a food and clothing drive. Within 48 hours, the community had raised over $1,500, gathered bags of clothes, and several people had offered job leads. Marcus knew nothing of this groundswell of support. He continued his routine, looking for day labor jobs in the morning, spending afternoons at the public library applying for positions online, and returning to his cardboard bed at night. On the 3rd day after his encounter with Sarah, he arrived at his makeshift shelter to find something that stopped him in his tracks. Bags of groceries, neatly folded clothes, a warm sleeping bag, and an envelope sat arranged in a careful pile where he usually slept. His hands shook as he opened the envelope, finding the money inside along with a note in Sarah's handwriting: "You gave me hope when I had none. Now a whole town wants to give some back to you. This is just the beginning." Marcus sank to his knees, the note clutched in his fist, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to cry. Not tears of despair this time, but of overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. He'd expected nothing in return for his small act of kindness, certainly not this outpouring of generosity from strangers. The next morning, Marcus walked into Jenny's diner, wearing one of the donated shirts. The breakfast rush fell silent as he entered, then erupted into applause. Jenny came out from behind the counter, her eyes glistening. "We've been hoping you'd come by," she said. "Folks around here heard what you did, and we wanted to do something too." She handed him another envelope. "There's a rental application for the apartment above the hardware store. Tom's been holding it for you. There are also 3 job interviews lined up this week, including one at Riverside Electric. And Marcus, breakfast is on the house. Today and every day until you get back on your feet." Over the following weeks, Marcus's life transformed in ways he never imagined possible. He got the job at Riverside Electric, moved into the small but clean apartment, and slowly began rebuilding his life. But something had fundamentally changed inside him. He'd experienced both the crushing weight of poverty and the lifting power of community generosity. He understood now that kindness wasn't about the size of the gift but the willingness to give when it cost you something. 6 months later, Marcus stood in that same convenience store, now dressed in his work uniform, his wallet full enough to be comfortable. He watched as an elderly man ahead of him counted coins for a loaf of bread, coming up short by $1.50. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward. "I've got it," he said, the words now familiar on his tongue. But Marcus didn't stop there. He started volunteering at the food bank where he'd once stood in line. He organized a fundraiser at Riverside Electric to support families facing eviction. He visited the construction site where he'd once slept and left care packages for others who might be seeking shelter there. His coworkers began calling him, "Pay It Forward Marcus," and the nickname stuck. Sarah Chen, whose own life had stabilized with a better paying job and manageable payment plans for her medical debt, often joined Marcus in his volunteer work. They formed an unlikely friendship, bonded by that moment in the convenience store that had catalyzed so much change. Together, they started a community initiative called $3 Forward, encouraging people to perform small acts of kindness without expecting anything in return. The local newspaper ran a feature story about Marcus and the chain reaction his simple act had created. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. Letters and emails poured in from across America, people sharing their own stories of struggle and kindness, of hitting rock bottom and being lifted by unexpected generosity. On a cold evening 1 year after that fateful night in the convenience store, the town of Riverside held a community gathering. The mayor presented Marcus with a key to the city, but what moved him most were the faces in the crowd. People he'd helped, people who'd helped him, and people who'd been inspired to help others. Sarah stood beside him, her daughter on her hip, both smiling widely. When Marcus was asked to speak, he kept it simple, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "A year ago, I had $3 and gave them away. I thought that was the end of something, but it was really the beginning. I learned that we're all just one moment, one choice, one act of kindness away from changing a life, including our own. The strength isn't in never falling down. The strength is in helping each other back up." As the crowd applauded, Marcus looked around at this community that had become his family, at Sarah who had turned his kindness into a movement, and at the countless ways $3 had multiplied into something immeasurable. He'd started with nothing and gained everything that truly mattered. That night, as Marcus walked home to his small apartment, he passed the construction site where he'd once slept. He paused, remembering the cold nights, the hunger, the fear. But he also remembered the moment he chose to give what little he had, and how that choice had opened a door to more blessings than he could have imagined. Sometimes, he realized, you have to empty your hands of what little you're holding to make room for what's meant to fill them. The story of Marcus Hayes reminds us that generosity isn't measured by what we have but by what we're willing to give. In our darkest moments, the light we offer others often illuminates our own path forward. And in a world that can feel increasingly divided and cold, small acts of human kindness remain our most powerful currency, and our greatest hope.